170 people sat under warm string lights in a ballroom perched on a mountain in Park City, Utah. Champagne flutes caught the glow like tiny captured sunsets. Our slideshow waited on a giant screen, photos Dylan and I had picked on a quiet Tuesday night, laughing at our own awkward teenage haircuts. And then Dylan stood up. He didn't clink a glass. He didn't smile for the room. He just took the microphone like he was about to read the weather and said, calm as a courtroom, before we start the speeches, there's something everyone here deserves to know. The room started to change. Conversations thinned. Chairs stopped scraping. Even the band, mid-song, faded into the kind of hush you get right before an avalanche. People were still whispering about the scene from the ceremony only hours earlier, how my parents had stood up and walked out like they were leaving a movie that bored them. Dylan looked over the crowd, then over at me. His eyes were steady, protective. The kind of steady that says, I've got you, even if this gets ugly. You saw Sophie's parents walk out earlier today, he said. You deserve to know why. My hands were folded in my lap so tightly my rings pressed into my skin. I hadn't cried. I hadn't begged. I hadn't done anything dramatic. I'd been taught my whole life that drama was what other people did. My family didn't do drama. My family did polite cruelty with a side of denial. But the truth was, my throat burned like I'd swallowed a lit match, because I knew what he was about to do, and I knew what it would cost. I'm Sophie. I'm 31. I work as a program manager for an education charity. Grants, metrics, outcomes. The kind of work where you fix problems by making lists and building systems instead of raising your voice. I live in Utah, close enough to my parents' small chain of auto dealerships that I can drive there in under an hour, far enough that I can pretend distance is a boundary. Growing up, my brother Evan was the sun and I was a lamp. Useful, steady, expected to keep shining without needing anything. Evan is 29 now. Extreme sports, expensive trips, that kind of effortless confidence that comes from knowing someone will always catch you. My mother used to say it wasn't favoritism. It was supporting his spirit. My father called it family priorities. I called it normal, right up until the day I realized normal was just a nicer word for trained. When Dylan and I got engaged, we chose our date fast, not impulsively, strategically. June 21st, 2025. The first weekend that felt like summer had fully arrived. Long daylight, mountain air, an outdoor terrace ceremony at a resort near Park City with a view so ridiculous it looked fake. We booked it a year out, signed the contract, paid the deposits, sent the save the dates. I made a spreadsheet that could have run NASA. When I told my parents, my mother sounded almost pleased. Oh, that's a beautiful date, she said. The weather will be perfect. My father said he'd help with the planning, which in my family was the closest thing to a hug. For a couple of months, everything stayed in the lane it was supposed to. My mother forwarded vendor suggestions like she was suddenly the kind of woman who kept a Pinterest board. My father asked about parking. Evan didn't care, which felt like a small mercy. Then spring arrived, and with it, the crack in the glass. It started with a phone call from my mother on an ordinary Tuesday. I was at my kitchen table, laptop open, halfway through an email about scholarship distribution when her name popped up on my screen. Her voice was bright in a way that always meant she'd already decided the answer to whatever she was asking. So, she said, like we were gossiping, Evan booked his ski trip. I blinked. It's April. And it's Whistler, she said, as if the word itself should make me stand up and applaud. Whistler Blackcomb. He got this whole package. Chalet, private lessons, helicopter excursions. That sounds expensive, I said carefully. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. He already paid for it. A pause. My stomach did that slow, sinking thing. What are the dates? She said it like it was nothing, like she wasn't about to detonate a year of planning. June 21st week. I didn't answer fast enough, and she added softer, maybe you can move the wedding. There it was. Not a question. A correction. I stared at my calendar on the wall like it might change if I looked hard enough. Mom, we can't. The contract, he already paid, she repeated, more pointed now. And you know how hard it is to get reservations like that. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do with the absurdity. Invitations are out, I said. Deposits are paid. The resort is booked. We planned this for a year. Well, she said, and the warmth drained from her voice. You could have picked a date that worked for everyone. I swallowed. It does work for everyone. It just doesn't work for Evan's vacation. Her inhale was sharp. You always have to make it sound like he's doing something wrong. I'm not, I said, and even to me my voice sounded too controlled, too polite. But I'm not moving my wedding for a ski trip. Silence on the line. Not the normal silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone withholding punishment. Then my mother said, let me talk to your father. The next call came a few days later. My father never wasted time with tone. He didn't do feelings. He did verdicts. Family comes first, he said, without greeting. I was at my desk at work, staring at a progress report I suddenly couldn't read. This is my wedding, I replied. He let out a slow breath like I was a stubborn employee. You're being selfish. I felt my pulse in my ears. I'm being selfish because I won't reschedule a wedding for a vacation? It's not just a vacation, he snapped. It's Evan. He already paid. He's excited. And you... His voice hardened. You always want things your way. I wanted to say, I have never had things my way. I wanted to list the times I folded, the times I swallowed my disappointment like medicine. But in my family, arguing was considered disrespect, and facts were only facts if they supported the hierarchy. So I said quietly, I'm not changing the date. There was a pause, and in that pause I could almost hear him choosing the thing that would hurt most. If you won't change the date, he said, maybe this will teach you humility. The word hit like cold water. Then he added, don't expect us to be there. My hand tightened around the phone. I could feel my face go still, the way it always did when something broke inside me and I needed to keep it invisible. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I didn't say, please, it's my wedding. I didn't say, you're my parents. I just said, then don't come. And I hung up. When I told Dylan that night, he didn't react the way my family would have expected. No lecture, no, we'll show them. He just listened, his eyebrows drawing together the more I spoke. They're really going to boycott your wedding, he said slowly, over a ski trip. It's not about the ski trip, I said, and I hated how tired my voice sounded. It's about control. Dylan's jaw tightened. He's a financial analyst. Numbers, documents, patterns. He isn't impressed by excuses. He isn't trained to accept because I said so as a reason. Evan paid for all that? He asked. Chalet, heli stuff. That's tens of thousands. Probably, I admitted, but he'll figure it out. He always does. Dylan's eyes narrowed a fraction. How? I shrugged, and the shrug felt like a lifetime of shrugging. My parents help him. Dylan stared at the ceiling for a moment, then back at me. Do you remember that fund your grandmother left? I froze. Years ago, after my grandmother died, there had been a lot of adult voices and paperwork I wasn't allowed to touch. I remembered my mother saying, almost breezily, Grandma wanted to set something aside for you, for when you have a big life moment. Wedding, house, whatever. I'd nodded like a good daughter. I'd never asked to see statements, because in my family, asking to see proof was the same as accusing someone of lying. I remember it, I said carefully. Dylan didn't smile. Do you know where it is? Something in me tightened. My parents manage it. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Sophie, do you have anything in writing? I stared at him. Why are you asking me this? Because, he said softly, this whole thing smells wrong. Dylan doesn't do unofficial investigations the way people do them in movies, with secret meetings and dramatic files. He does them the way he does everything, quietly, meticulously, without showing his hand. Over the next couple of weeks, he asked me for every document I had ever received from my parents about finances. Old emails, a scanned letter from years ago with my grandmother's executor information, a tax form I'd signed without reading because my father had told me it was routine. I felt ridiculous, pulling up ancient files like I was rummaging through my own past for evidence. Dylan searched public records. He looked at LLC filings tied to my parents' dealership network. He requested what he could legally request. He called numbers listed on documents and asked questions in that calm, polite tone that makes people answer without realizing they're giving something away. One night, he sat at our kitchen table with his laptop open and said, I found it. My stomach dropped. Found what? The transfer, he said. He turned the screen toward me. It was a bank document. Clean, official. The kind of paper that doesn't care about feelings. Amount, $68,000. Date, months before our wedding. Sender, an account tied to the family fund. Recipient, Evan. Memo line, something bland, almost mocking. Travel. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. It felt unreal, like my brain couldn't accept the shape of it. That can't be, I whispered. Dylan's voice stayed steady. It is. The air in the kitchen felt thin, like altitude sickness. Maybe it was a loan? Dylan shook his head. There's no repayment structure, no promissory note. And the fund account, Sophie, it's in a structure that was meant for you. It's not even subtle. I pressed my fingertips to my lips. I thought of my grandmother's hands, spotted with age, pulling me close when I was little. I thought of her saying, you have a good head. Don't let them talk you out of it. My throat tightened. They took it. Dylan's eyes didn't leave mine. And they gave it to Evan. I should have screamed. I should have driven to my parents' house and demanded answers like a person in a viral video. Instead, I sat very still, the way I always did when I was trying not to collapse. Dylan reached across the table and covered my hand. There's more, he said. That's when he showed me the messages. Not between my parents and Dylan. He'd never contacted them. Between Evan and my parents. One message made my stomach turn with a clarity I couldn't pretend away. Just take the money from Sophie's fund, Evan had written. She'll probably move the wedding anyway. I stared at the words. Not because they were complicated, but because they were so casual. He knew it was mine, and he still took it. The next day, I asked Evan to meet me for coffee. Not at our parents' place, not somewhere he could lean on familiar walls like armor. A little cafe in Park City, the kind with overpriced pastries and a view that makes you feel like you're paying for oxygen. He arrived late, sunglasses on even though we were indoors. He kissed my cheek like we were fine. "What's up?" he asked, already scrolling his phone. I didn't ease in. I didn't soften it. Something in me had finally gotten tired of translating pain into politeness. "Did you take $68,000 from Grandma's fund?" I asked. He blinked, then laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "Wow. Okay, straight to the accusation." "It's not an accusation," I said. "It's a bank transfer." He leaned back, expression tightening. "Why are you digging around in stuff you don't understand?" I almost smiled. That line, "you don't understand," had been used on me my entire life like a leash. "I understand numbers," I said calmly, "and I understand ownership." Evan's jaw flexed. "Mom and Dad said it was fine." "So you knew it was mine?" I said. He scoffed. "It's a family fund. It was left for me." He leaned forward, voice low, like he was sharing a secret. "You're 31, Soph. You've got a stable job. You've got Dylan. You're fine. I needed it." "For a ski trip," I said. He rolled his eyes. "For an experience. For networking. For whatever. Look, why are you doing this? You're really going to blow up the family over money?" "Over money. Not over betrayal. Not over theft. Not over the fact that my wedding was being held hostage. Just money." I watched him for a second and realized something that made me cold. He wasn't even ashamed. He was irritated, like I'd scratched his car. "Are you going to Whistler?" I asked. He hesitated. Just a flicker. Then he smiled, smug. "Yeah, unless you decide to be reasonable and move your wedding." I leaned back, my spine suddenly straight. "I'm not moving it." Evan's smile thinned. "Then don't expect Mom and Dad to pick you over me." There it was again. The family law. Gravity always points toward Evan. I nodded once, slowly. "Okay," he frowned. "Okay." I looked him in the eye. "Enjoy your trip." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't beg. But when I walked out of that cafe, the air outside felt different, sharper, cleaner, like the mountain had stripped something false off my skin. That was the moment Dylan and I made the plan. If my parents wanted to weaponize my wedding to teach me humility, fine. We'd give them a lesson too, just not the one they expected. We talked to a lawyer, quietly. We didn't storm into court. We gathered facts like ammunition. The fund had a paper trail. The transfer had documentation. Evan's message was proof of intent. My parents' management wasn't a blank check. The lawyer explained carefully what was possible. Demand letters, restitution, potential fraud, depending on how the fund was structured and what authority my parents claimed. Dylan didn't look excited. He looked focused, like he was aligning pieces on a board. "You don't have to do this," he told me that night. I stared at the ceiling. "Yes," I said, "I do, or this is the rest of my life." The closer we got to June 21st, the quieter my parents became. No more vendor tips, no more questions about seating charts. Just a polite, brittle distance like they'd already decided I was the one who had betrayed them. A week before the wedding, my mother called. Her voice was syrupy. "So, have you thought about it?" "About what?" I asked. "About being flexible," she said, and I could hear the smile again, the one that meant she expected obedience. "Evan's already packed. He's so excited. I just hate that this is turning into a thing." "A thing," I repeated. My voice was calm. "It's my wedding." She sighed dramatically. "You always take things personally." I let the silence stretch. Then she said, softer, like she was offering me mercy, "If you move the date, we can all be happy." I swallowed. My throat felt tight, but my voice didn't break. "I'm not moving it." The pause on her end was heavy. "Then," she said, cold now, "don't be surprised when people stop bending for you." I almost laughed again, bending for me, like I was the one everyone had been accommodating. "Okay," I said. And I hung up. June 21st, 2025 arrived bright and clear, the kind of mountain day that looks like a postcard and feels like a dare. The terrace was set with white chairs and pale flowers that moved gently in the breeze. The mountains stood behind us, indifferent and enormous. 170 guests took their seats, smiling, fanning themselves, adjusting sunglasses. I watched faces I loved. Friends, co-workers, Dylan's family, even a few cousins from my side who looked slightly nervous, like they weren't sure which version of my parents they were about to witness. When the music started and I stepped onto the aisle, I didn't search the front row for my mother's eyes. I didn't look for my father's approval. I kept my gaze on Dylan. He stood there like he was anchoring the whole mountain. The ceremony was beautiful. Simple vows, honest words. The kind of moment that feels like time pauses to listen. And then, right in the middle of it, my father stood up. Not quietly, not discreetly. He pushed his chair back with a scrape that made people turn. My mother stood too, lips pressed into a line so tight it looked practiced. My father's voice cut through the air. "We're leaving." A murmur rippled through the guests like wind through grass. I felt every eye swing toward me. My father looked at me like I was a stubborn child. "Maybe one day," he said loudly, "you'll understand what humility means." And then he walked out. My mother followed, not even glancing back. 170 people watched my parents abandon my wedding like it was a performance, and they were making sure everyone saw their exit. I didn't cry. My hands didn't shake. I just turned back to Dylan, and he looked at me with something fierce in his eyes. We finished the ceremony. We said, "I do." We kissed. And the mountain wind kept moving like nothing had happened. At the reception, people tried to act normal. They congratulated us a little too loudly. They avoided mentioning my parents the way people avoid mentioning an open wound. I smiled. I thanked everyone. I danced. I took photos. I let my happiness exist in the same room as the humiliation because I refused to let my parents own the tone of my day. But inside, something was cracking and healing at the same time. When dinner was served and the band started warming up again, I thought, maybe we can just get through this. Maybe we can keep it private. Maybe I can swallow it like I always do. Then Dylan stood up. He didn't look angry. That would have been too easy for people to dismiss. He looked composed, surgical. He took the microphone, and the room, still buzzing with leftover tension from the walkout, slowly went quiet. "Before we start the speeches," he said, "there's something everyone here deserves to know." My heart thudded once, hard. He continued, "You saw Sophie's parents walk out earlier today. You deserve to know why." Someone near the back shifted in their chair. A fork clinked against a plate and then stopped, like the person holding it realized they'd made noise at the wrong time. Dylan nodded toward the screen. The slideshow vanished. A bank document appeared instead, blown up large enough that even the people at the far tables could read the numbers. Amount, $68,000. Recipient, Evan. My stomach tightened, but my spine stayed straight. Dylan's voice stayed steady. "Sophie's parents didn't boycott this wedding because of a ski trip." A collective inhale moved through the room. "They boycotted it," he said, "because Sophie refused to move her wedding date so her brother could still go on that trip." People started whispering. Heads turned, eyes widened. Dylan didn't let it spiral. He held the room like he'd been trained for this. "This transfer," he said, pointing, "came from a fund Sophie's grandmother left for her, for a major life moment." He let the words sit, let them land. "Months before the wedding," he continued, "that money was taken and sent to Evan." You could hear nothing now, not even the band, not even the clink of glass. 170 people sitting in the kind of silence that feels like pressure. Then Dylan clicked to the next slide, a screenshot of a message. Evan's words, black on white, with the kind of casual cruelty that makes your skin crawl. "Just take the money from Sophie's fund," it read. "She'll probably move the wedding anyway." Someone near the front let out a soft, involuntary sound, half gasp, half laugh of disbelief. I sat very still. My hands were cold. Dylan's voice softened just a fraction when he said, "Sophie didn't beg. She didn't cry. She didn't try to force anyone to stay. She simply refused to be bullied out of her own wedding date." He paused, eyes scanning the room. And today, when her parents walked out and told her this was to teach her humility, what they were really doing was protecting a lie. I felt it then. The moment the room shifted from awkward sympathy to something sharper. People weren't just watching drama anymore. They were seeing theft, manipulation, a lifetime of it, condensed into one ugly little message. My cheeks burned. Not from shame, something else. Exposure, like sunlight on a bruise. Dylan lowered the microphone slightly and looked at me. "Sophie," he said quietly, but the room was so silent everyone heard it. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." That's when the tears came. Not loud, not messy, but sudden and hot, like my body had been waiting for permission. I wiped them fast, almost annoyed at myself, and then I laughed softly because of course I would cry only when my husband stood up and did what my whole family had spent decades teaching me not to do, tell the truth out loud. The next part wasn't cinematic, it was practical. A week before the wedding, our lawyer had drafted the demand letter. It was already ready to go. The morning after the reception, while my bouquet was wilting in a glass of water on the hotel dresser and my feet still ached from dancing, Dylan hit send. We didn't post anything online. We didn't rant. We didn't give my parents the satisfaction of calling it drama. We let paper do what paper does best, pin lies to the wall. My parents called, of course. My mother left voicemails that sounded like she was auditioning for sainthood. "How could you embarrass us like that?" she cried. "In front of everyone?" My father's message was colder. "You think you're clever? You think you've won?" Evan texted me. 3 words. "Are you insane?" I stared at my phone, then typed back, "No, I'm awake." The money came back in pieces. Not immediately, not gracefully. There were threats, accusations, guilt trips dressed up as concern. My mother said, "You're tearing this family apart. My father said, "You'll regret humiliating us." Evan said, "You always have to ruin things." I didn't argue with any of them. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to get them to understand. Because here's the thing I learned too late. People who benefit from misunderstanding, you will never suddenly start listening. The restitution agreement was signed. The fund was restructured so my parents couldn't touch it again. My lawyer made sure the paperwork had teeth. And then I did the hardest thing, the smartest thing, the thing that felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering solid ground. I stopped chasing them. I didn't call to soothe my mother's wounded pride. I didn't apologize for my father's consequences. I didn't try to patch things up with Evan like he'd just made a mistake. I let the silence be a boundary instead of a punishment. A few months later, I ran into a cousin at a grocery store. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak to me. Then she said, almost shyly, "I was at your wedding." I nodded. She swallowed. I never knew about the way they treated you. Not really. Not like that. I thought of the screen glowing in that ballroom, of 170 people finally seeing what I'd spent my life swallowing. I didn't either, I said honestly. Not until I saw it written down. On some days, I still hear my father's voice in my head, teach you humility, like he was handing me a life lesson. But the lesson wasn't what he thought. Humility isn't letting people take from you to keep the peace. Humility is realizing you can be loved without shrinking. It's understanding that being calm doesn't mean being compliant. And if someone can only stand you when you're bending, they never loved you. They just loved the shape you made when you stayed quiet. Dylan and I still have our wedding photos, the terrace, the mountains, the sunlight. In one shot, you can see the exact moment my parents' chairs are empty in the front row. People sometimes ask if it ruined my wedding day. I tell them the truth. My parents tried to turn my wedding into a punishment. They tried to teach me humility by leaving. But all they did was give me something I'd never had before. A clean line between who I was and who they wanted me to be. And when my husband stood up in that reception hall and the room went quiet, it wasn't humiliation I felt. It was relief. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one holding the truth.